The water reflected the late afternoon sky as she murmured the words that would change everything forever. "Don't throw me in. I can't swim." It was a simple request, almost a whisper, but it carried 95 years of unconditional love that he had forgotten to see. Before we dive into this story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The sun dragged lazily across the Thursday afternoon as Edward Miller returned home. 48 years old, his grey hair meticulously cut with military precision, a Patek Philippe watch worth more than 3 economy cars combined. He had everything: companies that grew on their own, investments that multiplied while he slept, a bank account that seemed endless. But there was something money couldn't buy, a restlessness that lived deep in his chest, an emptiness he pretended not to feel every time he looked in the mirror. The 2,000-square-foot mansion greeted him with its usual silence. Italian marble floors, Czech crystal chandeliers, artworks he bought but never stopped to admire. Everything perfect, everything cold, everything devoid of soul. His mom was there, as always, sitting in the wrought-iron chair beside the pool, watching the leaves dance on the crystal blue water. Mrs. Eleanor Miller, 95 years of life, hair white as summer clouds, hands marked by time, and the hard work that sustained the big dreams of a poor boy. "Good afternoon, my son." Her voice was a silk thread worn by time, soft and tired like a whispered prayer. Edward barely looked up from his phone. The screen glowed with numbers, graphs, urgent messages that seemed to scream for attention. He spoke loudly on the phone, gesticulating impatiently, pacing back and forth like a caged predator. "No, Paul. I said 2%, not 3. Are you deaf or just pretending not to understand English?" His harsh tone echoed through the backyard. Mrs. Miller smiled that way only mothers can, a smile that carries love and sadness in equal measure. She had learned to love her son even in moments when he completely forgot how to be human. "Edward, have you eaten anything today?" she asked, her voice as fragile as a dry leaf. He sighed, exasperated. He ended the call with an abrupt movement and shoved the phone into his Italian suit pocket like someone holstering a weapon. "Mom, I have a company to run. 5 companies, actually. I can't sit here drinking coffee and talking about the weather." The words came out sharper than he intended, like blades sharpened by fatigue and irritation. Mrs. Miller lowered her eyes, but the smile remained, a wounded smile, the kind mothers learn to use when their children turn into strangers. "I know, my son. It's just that sometimes I feel like you don't even see me anymore." The sentence hung in the air like extinguished cigarette smoke. Edward paused for a second, just 1 second, and looked at his mum. Really looked. He saw a small, fragile lady who seemed to shrink a little more with each passing day. He saw her trembling hands resting on her lap, her paused breathing, her eyes shining with a mixture of infinite pride and deep loneliness. But the phone rang again, and he answered on the first ring. "Hello? Yes, I can talk now. No, I'm not busy." Mrs. Miller sighed softly, a sound almost imperceptible, like the flight of a hummingbird. She pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her slender shoulders and closed her eyes. The afternoon sun still warmed her, but something inside her felt cold, the cold of abandonment, the cold of indifference, the cold of someone who loves more than she is loved. Edward paced the edge of the pool, speaking loudly about mergers and acquisitions, about numbers that rose and fell like waves on a distant, cruel sea. He gestured so much that he didn't notice when his mum tried to get up from the chair. She just wanted to stretch her legs, take a few steps around the garden she herself had planted decades ago, but at 95, her legs didn't respond like they used to. Her muscles protested. Her bones complained, her balance wavered like a flame in the wind. She leaned on the edge of the iron chair, hesitated, took a deep breath. and tried to take a step. "Careful!" Edward yelled, more irritated than concerned, without even looking at her properly. "Mum, just stay still. I'm on the phone. It's important." "I'm sorry, son. It's just that I wanted to—" she began, her voice even lower. "Just wanted what? To make my life more complicated? Isn't it enough that I have to support this whole house? Now I have to babysit too?" The words came out like a slap in the face, cruel and unnecessary. Edward didn't even realize what he had said. He was too distracted by the numbers on his phone screen to notice he had just broken the heart of the woman who gave her life for him. But Mrs. Miller felt every syllable like a needle piercing her chest. She said nothing. She just smiled once more, that way only mothers can, when love is greater than pain. And she tried to go back to the chair, her steps even more uncertain. Her right foot tripped on the edge of the Persian rug that was poorly placed over the stone patio. She lost her balance, tried to lean on the small iron table where the crystal vase with the flowers she arranged every morning sat. But the table was also unstable, with one of its legs wobbly. "Edward!" It was a small cry, almost a desperate whisper filled with fright and plea. He turned at the exact moment he saw his mom lose her balance and fall toward the pool. His phone slipped from his hand like wet soap, shattering on the stone floor with a dry, final crash. Time stretched like a rubber band about to snap. "Don't throw me in, I can't swim." Those were the last words she managed to say before the blue water closed over her like a liquid coffin. Edward ran faster than he had ever run in his life. He plunged into the pool, Armani suit and all. Feeling the icy water cut his skin like 1,000 small knives, the expensive fabric clinging to his body, his Italian leather shoes turning into dead weight on his feet. But none of that mattered. Absolutely nothing. His mum was drowning. He reached her in a few seconds that felt like endless hours. Mrs. Miller flailed her arms desperately in the water, gulping salty chlorine and despair, her eyes wide with pure terror. Edward grabbed her slender waist, feeling how small and fragile she was in his arms, pulled her to the surface with desperate strength, and swam toward the edge of the pool, carrying her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Calm down, Mum, calm down, I'm here." When they finally got out of the water, both were trembling, she from cold and fright, he from fear and guilt. Mrs. Miller coughed violently, spitting chlorinated water, her small body convulsing like a leaf in the wind. Edward carried her in his arms into the house, shouting for Helen, the nurse who cared for her when he was working. "Helen! Helen! Quickly! Call 911!" He placed his mom on the velvet sofa in the living room, covered her with every blanket he could find in the house, held her icy hands in his, hands of a businessman that had never trembled in any meeting, but now shook like jelly. "Mom, it's okay. It's all okay now. You're safe." Mrs. Miller gradually stopped trembling, like a wind-up doll losing its spring. She looked at her drenched son, his always perfectly combed hair now disheveled and dripping, his extremely expensive suit completely ruined, forming puddles of water on the Persian rug, and she smiled. "You jumped in the water for me." "Of course I jumped. What did you expect? That I would stand there watching you drown?" "I expected—" She took a deep breath, searching for air as if searching for forgiveness. "I expected you to love me as much as I love you." Edward felt something crack inside his chest. It wasn't his ribs bruised from the desperate dive. It was something else, deeper. Something that had been petrified for so long that he had forgotten it could break and that it could hurt. Helen arrived running through the house's corridors, her footsteps echoing on the marble, carrying the first aid kit. She checked Mrs. Miller's vital signs, brought dry, warm clothes, and prepared a calming tea. But Edward couldn't move from his spot. He stayed there, sitting beside his mom on the sofa, holding her hand as if it were an anchor, staring fixedly at the water that dripped from his hair and made small puddles on the floor. "Mom, I didn't mean to." I never wanted this to happen. I know, my son. I always knew. Her voice was weaker than a whisper, but it carried a strength Edward couldn't understand. How could she be there, comforting him when she had almost died because of him? How could she have so much serenity when he was shattered inside? "You were always a good boy," Mrs. Miller said, passing her trembling hand over her son's wet face. "You just forgot it along the way." The phrase echoed in his head like a church bell. Good boy. When was the last time someone called him that? When was the last time he felt that way? Just a boy who needed his mother's love. "I almost killed you," he murmured, his voice choked. "No, you saved me." "But Edward." She squeezed his hand with all the strength she still had. "You may have pushed me away with harsh words all these years, but today you jumped in the water to save me. That's what I'll remember." That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He paced the house like a condemned ghost, passing through the empty corridors, stopping before the expensive paintings he had never truly observed, looking out the window at the illuminated pool that now seemed like an open wound in the backyard. He replayed every second of the accident, his mum's look of terror, her scream for help, the sound of the water closing over her, the despair he felt seeing her disappear beneath the surface, the feeling of almost losing her forever. But what tormented him most was not what had happened in those terrible seconds. It was everything that had happened before, the years of indifference, the cutting words, the phone calls answered in front of her as if her presence mattered no more than an old piece of furniture, the cancelled lunches, the postponed visits, the times she tried to tell a story from her youth, and he was too busy with spreadsheets to listen. The memories came in waves, one more painful than the other. Edward remembered when he was a child, and their home was a 15-square-foot room in a small, struggling neighborhood on the south side. Mrs. Miller worked as a cleaner in 3 different houses to pay for his education. She left before dawn, returned at night, her hands chapped from using heavy cleaning products. But she always had the energy to sit beside him and help with his homework. "I don't understand these calculations, Edward," she would say, pointing to the math problems in his worn notebook. "But I understand they're important to you, so they're important to me too." She would stay there until he finished everything, even when she was dead tired, even when she had to wake up at 5 in the morning the next day to start all over again. Now, Edward had enough money to buy 100 houses like those where she worked scrubbing other people's floors. He had employees, drivers, secretaries, but when was the last time he said something of hers was important to him? When was the last time he sat beside her just to talk? He remembered the day he received his first diploma in accounting from a humble state school. Mrs. Miller cried so much with pride that her tears dampened the certificate. She said she was going to frame it and hang it in the living room, even though the living room was just a corner of the room she shared with Edward. "My son is going to be a success story," she would tell the neighbors, showing the paper as if it were gold. "He's going to have a life I never could have." Edward graduated in business administration years later. Then he got an MBA. Then he started his first business. With each achievement, Mrs. Miller was there, applauding, crying with joy, telling anyone who would listen about her son's success. But as his success grew, he distanced himself. He moved homes, first to a better apartment, then to a house in an upscale neighborhood, finally to the mansion where they now lived. With each move, he would tell his mom, "It's so you can have a better life, Mom. It's so you never have to worry about money again." And it was true. Mrs. Miller never had to work again, never had to worry about bills. She had a private nurse, private doctors, everything money could buy, everything except her son's attention. Edward stopped before the bookshelves in the house's library. Expensive books, with leather covers, which he bought more to impress visitors than to read. But there, lost among volumes of economics and philosophy, was a worn book, with a peeling cover. He pulled the book from the shelf. The Little Prince. It was the first book Mrs. Miller had bought for him as a child, a simple edition that cost 3 days of her salary. Edward opened to the first page and saw the handwritten dedication in careful script. To Edward, who will fly higher than any airplane. With all the love in the world, your adoring mother. He remembered the night she gave him the gift. It was his 12th birthday, and they had no money for a party. She made a simple cake with ingredients she had saved for weeks and gave him the book with a shy smile. I'm sorry it's not anything better, son, but the lady at the bookstore said it's a very beautiful book. It talks about friendship and important things. Edward had read the entire book that night by the dim light of the small room's lamp. He read it aloud to her, and they both laughed and cried together at the adventures of the little prince. Now, 36 years later, he held the same book and cried alone in the silent library of the empty mansion. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the sky pink and orange. Edward hadn't slept a minute, but he felt more awake than he had in years. He showered, put on simple clothes, jeans and a cotton shirt he hadn't worn in ages, and went to the kitchen. For the first time in decades, he decided to prepare breakfast for his mom. He rummaged through the kitchen like a stranger in an unknown land. Where were the eggs? How did he turn on the stove? How long did it take to make toast? He burned the first attempt, then the second. On the third, he managed somewhat lopsided scrambled eggs and slightly burned toast, but made with his own hands. Mrs. Miller came down to the breakfast nook, supported by Helen. She walked slowly, still fragile after the fright of the day before, but smiled when she saw her son in the kitchen. You didn't have to, Edward. I want to. Today I want to take care of you. She sat at the table and ate the lopsided eggs and burned toast as if it were a meal fit for kings. Edward sat beside her, not at the head of the table, as he always did, but beside her, close by, where he could see her face as they talked. Mom, tell me a story from when you were young. Mrs. Miller's eyes widened in surprise. Edward never asked to hear stories. What kind of story, son? Anyone. I want to get to know you better. And she told him. She told him about her childhood in the countryside, about how she met Edward's father at a town fair, about how difficult but rewarding it was to raise a son alone after he died. Edward discovered that his mom had been an elementary school teacher before he was born. He discovered she knew how to play the guitar. He discovered she had written poems when she was young. Do you still remember the poems? Some of them. Recite one for me. Mrs. Miller blushed like a teenager. Oh, Edward, they're just silly childhood things. Please. She took a deep breath and recited, her voice trembling but tender. In my backyard, I planted a small flower. I watered it every day with water and with sadness. The flower grew beautiful, more beautiful than I dreamed, and when it bloomed, that's when I found you. What does it mean? It was about you, she whispered. The flower was you. I planted you in my heart and watered you with tears on difficult days, but when you grew up and became the successful man you are today, that's when I understood it was all worth it. Edward felt his eyes well up. He held his mum's hand across the table. I never knew you wrote poems. You never asked. The sentence hung in the air, simple and devastating. You never asked. How many things did Edward not know about his own mom because he had never asked? How many stories, how many dreams, how many fears and joys had he missed because he was too busy counting money? They spent the entire morning talking. Edward cancelled all his meetings, something unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. He turned off his phone. He told his secretary to reschedule everything. For the first time in years, the world would have to wait. He discovered that Mrs. Miller still read the books he liked as a child, trying to understand her son's tastes. He discovered that she had kept all the drawings he made in first grade, organized in a folder with the care of a museum curator. He discovered that she knew the names of all the employees of his 5 companies by heart, because she always asked about them in the few conversations they had. "How do you know the names of so many people who work with me?" "Because you are my whole life, Edward. You always have been. So everything that is part of your life is part of mine too." The phrase echoed in his head like music. You are my whole life. When was the last time someone said that to him? When was the last time he was someone's whole life? In the afternoon, he took his mom for a walk in the garden. She leaned on his arm, walking slowly, stopping from time to rest or to smell the flowers she herself had planted over the years. "These rose bushes are still blooming," she commented, pointing to the red roses growing by the wall. "When did you plant them?" "Right after you graduated from college. I was so proud. I planted them to celebrate, so we would always have beautiful flowers at home." Edward stopped mid-walk. He looked at the rose bushes laden with red, fragrant flowers. 15 years. She had planted those roses 15 years ago to celebrate his graduation, and he had never noticed. He passed them every day and had never stopped to see that they existed. "Mom." "What is it, son?" Edward wanted to say so many things. He wanted to apologize for all the lost years, for all the harsh words, for all the moments he chose Excel spreadsheets instead of her smile. He wanted to say he loved her, that he always had, that he had just forgotten to show it. He wanted to say she was the most important person in his life, even when he acted as if she were a hindrance. But the words wouldn't come. The emotion was stuck in his throat like a thorn. So he did the only thing he could. He hugged her. Mrs. Miller allowed herself to be hugged, small and fragile, in the arms of the son who had grown so much. She felt his tears falling on her white hair and murmured softly, "Don't cry, my love. We still have time." We still have time. The most important words he had heard in years. In the days that followed, Edward completely changed his routine. He hired a general manager to handle the most urgent corporate matters and started working from home. Every morning he had coffee with his mum at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room. Every afternoon they walked in the garden or sat on the porch to talk about life. He discovered that Mrs. Miller had an impressive memory for details he had forgotten. She remembered stories from when he was a baby that he didn't even know existed. She told him about his first day of school, about the first time he said he loved her, about the day he announced he wanted to be an entrepreneur. "You were 8 years old," she laughed, stirring sugar into her coffee with a silver spoon. "You came home from school saying you were going to own everything and that I would never have to work again. And I kept my promise, didn't I?" "You did. But do you know what else I wanted?" "What?" "That you would be happy. Not rich. Happy." Edward paused to think. When was the last time he felt truly happy? Not satisfied with a successful negotiation, not proud of an unexpected profit, not vain about a newspaper article discussing his fortune, truly happy with that simple and complete happiness he felt as a child. He couldn't remember. "Are you happy, Mom?" "Now I am," she replied, smiling. "These last few days have been the best of my life in a long time." "Why?" "Because I have my son back." The sentence fell like a silent bomb. I have my son back. Edward understood that he had disappeared from her life long before the accident in the pool. He had become a stranger living in the same house, a successful businessman who happened to share the same last name, but no longer the son she had raised with so much love. A week after the accident, they were sitting on the porch when Mrs. Miller asked a question that changed everything. "Son, can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Of course, Mom. You can say anything. That day at the pool, when I said I couldn't swim. Edward tensed. He still felt guilty about what had happened, still woke up in the middle of the night, reliving the despair of those seconds. I lied. What do you mean? He frowned, not understanding. Mrs. Miller smiled mischievously, like a child sharing a secret. I do know how to swim. I learned when I was young, before you were born. My father taught me in the river that ran near our house in the countryside. Edward's eyes widened. But then why did you say, because when you're old and falling into the water, fear makes you forget everything. Fear makes you a child again. And children scream for their mother when they're scared. She paused, looking at the pool where she had almost drowned. But do you know what else scared me at that moment? What? Thinking that I would die and you wouldn't know how much I love you. Thinking that our last conversation had been a silly argument about the phone and appointments. Edward felt his heart clench like a fist. Mom, I never wanted you to think. I know, son. I always knew you loved me even when you forgot to show it. Mothers have a radar for these things. They remained silent for a few minutes, listening to the wind playing with the leaves on the trees and the distant sound of city traffic. Edward. Yes? Thank you for jumping in the water to save me. Edward looked at her, confused. Thank you for reminding me that you're still my boy, even when you pretend to be just an important businessman. Thank you for teaching me to swim in love again, Mom. Mrs. Miller frowned. But you always knew how to swim. I'm not talking about the pool. She understood, and she smiled that smile only mothers can give, full of pride, forgiveness, and hope. The months that followed were the best of Edward's life since he was a child. He continued to manage his businesses, but with a completely different perspective. He started giving more opportunities for employees to grow in their careers. He created a health and psychological assistance program for employees' families. When asked about these changes, he would reply, I learned that success without family isn't success. It's expensive loneliness. Mrs. Miller grew more physically fragile each day, but also happier. She loved seeing her son return from the office in the middle of the afternoon just to have coffee with her. She enjoyed hearing stories about the businesses, offering opinions on important decisions. Edward discovered she had a surprising business instinct. How do you know that partnership won't work? He asked one afternoon, after she criticized a proposal that looked good on paper. Because you described the partners to me. One smiles too much and the other never smiles. A man who smiles too much is hiding something. A man who never smiles doesn't know how to share joy. A good business is built with balanced people. Edward laughed, impressed by his mum's simple wisdom. You should have been a businesswoman. I was. I created the best product that ever existed in the world. What product? You. The answer came so naturally that it took Edward a few seconds to process what she had said. When he understood, he felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked him over. In November, Mrs. Miller contracted pneumonia. Nothing too serious for a young person, but sufficiently concerning for a 95-year-old lady. Edward spent 5 consecutive nights in the hospital, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside her bed, holding her hand, talking softly so she knew she wasn't alone. Son, she murmured one dawn when her fever was highest. I'm here, Mom. I'm not leaving. If I die, you're not going to die. I won't let you. If I die, she insisted, with surprising strength in her weak voice. I want you to know that these last few months have been the most beautiful gift life has given me. For me too, Mom. And I want you to continue to be happy after I'm gone. Find a good woman to love. Have children. Be the wonderful father I know you can be. Edward swallowed the tears that threatened to come out. I promise, Mom. But you'll be here to see all of that happen. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll see it from somewhere else, cheering you on as I always have. Mrs. Miller made a full recovery from the pneumonia. Doctors said it was almost a miracle for someone her age. Edward knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the willpower of someone who still had a lot of love to give. She returned home on December 20th, in time for them to spend Christmas together. Edward cancelled the trip he had planned to Switzerland and stayed home, just the two of them. They decorated the tree together, prepared Christmas dinner together. He cooked badly, but he cooked with love, and she said it was the most delicious food she had ever tasted. On the 24th, sitting in the living room with only the colourful lights of the Christmas tree illuminating the room, Mrs. Miller made a request. "Edward, can I ask you something?" "Anything, Mom. You know I'd do anything for you. When I die, I don't want you to sell this house." "Why?" "Because here you learned to love me again, and I want you to always remember that, especially when you start your own family." Edward promised without hesitation. "And there's something else. Tell me. I want you to turn the pool into something else. A garden, a fountain, whatever you want, but I don't want it to be a pool anymore." "Why?" "Because I want this place to represent life, not the day I almost died. I want your children to play here and see beauty, not tragedy." Edward held her hand. "I already know exactly what I'm going to do." Mrs. Miller died one April morning in her sleep. She died smiling, her hand in her son's, while he read to her the same book she used to read to him as a child, The Little Prince. Edward was in the middle of the passage about the fox and its secret when he realized his mom's breathing had softly ceased. He didn't scream. He didn't despair. He just kissed her forehead, whispered, "Thank you for everything," and called Helen to arrange what was necessary. The funeral was exactly as she had requested, simple, full of flowers, with many people who loved her. Neighbors she had won over with her sweetness came, former employers from her cleaning days, doctors and nurses who cared for her, employees from Edward's companies whom she always treated like family. During the ceremony, Edward read a letter he had written to her. "Mum, you spent your whole life teaching me to fly. It took me 48 years to understand that flying isn't about climbing higher than others. It's about never forgetting where you came from and who gave you your wings. Thank you for waiting for me to learn. Thank you for loving me until I remembered how to love back. Thank you for saving me long before I saved you in the pool." He kept her ashes in a beautiful ceramic urn and placed it on the porch where they used to talk every afternoon. Every day, after returning from work, he would sit there and tell her about his day. He talked about business, about the people he met, about the decisions he had to make, and he always ended by saying, "Thank you for teaching me that love is the only thing that truly matters in life, Mom." 6 months after Mrs. Miller's death, Edward met Anna in a bookstore. She was buying children's books. She was a pediatrician and enjoyed reading to the children at the hospital where she worked. She was 38, smiled easily, and spoke warmly about her work. On their first date, during a simple dinner, she asked about his family. Edward told her everything. About his poor childhood, about his mom's sacrifice to pay for his education, about how he became rich but forgot to be happy, about the pool accident that changed everything, about Mrs. Miller's last months of life, which were the best of his life. "She must have been a very special woman," Anna said, her eyes shining with emotion. "She was the most special person who ever lived. And she taught me the most important thing in the world." "What was that?" "That love isn't something you save for later, waiting for the right moment. It's something you live every day, in every gesture, in every word, in every choice we make." Anna smiled. "I'd like to see the place where you lived." Edward took her home the following week. He showed her the gardens Mrs. Miller had planted, the porch where they talked, the rooms full of memories, and he showed her the project he was building where the pool used to be. "What will it be?" "An aquatic garden, with flowers floating on the water, colourful fish, a fountain in the center that will make a soft sound. I want it to be the most beautiful place in the house. Why flowers on the water? Because she taught me that even tragedies can be transformed into beauty when you have enough love for it. Anna was silent for a few minutes, admiring the project. Can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you think your mom would approve of our friendship? Edward smiled. She would adore you. And do you know how I know? How? Because you asked about her before you asked about me. My mom always said that people who are interested in others' stories have good hearts. They dated for a year before Edward asked Anna to marry him. The proposal took place exactly in the aquatic garden he had built in place of the pool, a place that was now a symbol of rebirth, not near tragedy. The wedding ceremony happened at the house in the garden where Mrs. Miller had planted the rose bushes. Edward made sure to bring the urn with his mum's ashes to the ceremony. "She is here with us," he told the minister. "She will always be in everything that is beautiful and full of love in my life." During their honeymoon, on a beach along the Carolina coast, Edward told Anna about all his plans for the future. He wanted to have children. He wanted to be present in their lives in a way he took too long to learn to be with his mom. He wanted to teach them everything Mrs. Miller had taught him about love, family, and priorities in life. "What if our children make the same mistakes you made?" Anna asked, playing with the sand between her toes. "What if they grow up and forget about family because of work?" Edward thought for a few minutes, watching the ocean waves break on the beach. "Then I'll do exactly what my mum did with me." What was that? "I'll keep loving them until they remember how to love back. Because that's what mothers do. That's what true love does. It doesn't give up, it doesn't tire, it doesn't diminish. It just stays there, waiting for you to remember it was always there." 2 years after the wedding, the couple's first daughter was born. Edward insisted she be named Eleanor in honor of her grandmother. Anna agreed immediately. "It's the most beautiful name I've ever heard," she said, "and it will be a way to keep your mom always present in our family." Edward held little Eleanor in his arms and whispered to her, "You have the name of the most special grandma who ever existed in the world. She isn't here to meet you in person, but I'm going to tell you so many stories about her that it will be as if you were best friends." And he did tell them. Every night before putting his daughter to sleep, Edward told stories about Grandma Eleanor. He spoke about her courage to raise a son alone, about her sacrifice working in 3 houses to pay for private school, about the simple wisdom that came from life experience, about the unconditional love that never changed, even when he forgot to reciprocate. "Grandma Eleanor taught me that family is the only wealth truly worth having in life," he would tell his daughter, who listened with attentive eyes, even without understanding the words. "And you, my little one, are the continuation of her story." Eleanor grew up hearing these stories every night. She grew up knowing she had a grandmother in heaven who loved her immensely, even without ever having met her in person. She grew up understanding that love is an inheritance passed down from generation to generation, more valuable than any money or property. When she turned 5, little Eleanor made a request that surprised Edward. "Daddy, can I see the place where Grandma Eleanor fell into the water?" Edward held his daughter's hand and led her to the aquatic garden. The place was even more beautiful. The aquatic plants had grown. Colorful fish swam happily among the flowers. The fountain in the center made a relaxing sound, like soft music. "But Daddy, this doesn't look like a place where something sad happened." "That's because it's not a sad place anymore, sweetheart. Now it's a place of life and beauty." Why did it change? Because Grandma taught me that even the most difficult things can turn into beautiful things when you have enough love in your heart. Eleanor looked at the aquatic garden with childlike curiosity. Would Grandma Eleanor like this garden? She would adore it. She always loved flowers and beautiful things. So, she's here now? Edward knelt down to his daughter's height. What do you mean, little one? If she would like the flowers, then every time the flowers get more beautiful, it's because she's taking care of them from heaven. Edward felt his eyes fill with tears of emotion. He hugged his daughter tightly and said, "You are absolutely right, Eleanor. Grandma is always here, and she will always be in every place where there is true love." That night, after putting Eleanor to sleep, Edward sat on the porch where he used to talk with his mom. Anna approached and sat beside him, as she did every night. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking that today marks exactly 7 years since my mom died. And how do you feel?" Edward took a deep breath, feeling the night breeze bring the scent of the garden flowers. Grateful, immensely grateful. Grateful for what? For having learned to love her while there was still time, for having discovered that loving someone isn't just about being together physically, it's about being present emotionally. It's about choosing every day to be a better person because of who you love. Anna squeezed his hand. "Your mom would be very proud of the man you've become. She always said I was a good boy who had just forgotten it along the way. I think I've finally remembered." They remained silent for a few minutes, listening to the soft sound of the fountain in the aquatic garden, feeling the peace that came from a house full of love. Edward, "Yes? Thank you for letting me be part of this story, for telling me about your mom in a way that made me love her too, even without having met her. Thank you for helping me continue her story in the best possible way." That dawn, Edward had a different dream. He dreamed he was on a huge beach where the waves made a soft sound. Mrs. Miller was there, young and smiling, wearing a white dress that swayed in the wind. "Mom, are you okay? Are you happy where you are?" "Yes, my son, and I'm very proud of you. Did you see how beautiful Eleanor is growing? How smart she is?" "I did. She has your heart and my stubbornness. She's going to be a very special girl." "Mom, I still miss you." "I know, but missing me is just proof that our love was real. And real love never dies, Edward. It just changes form." "How so?" "Now our love lives in the way you care for Anna, in the way you tell my stories to Eleanor, in the way you chose to be present instead of just being rich. Love doesn't end, son. It multiplies." Edward woke up with tears in his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. He slowly got up, not to wake Anna, went to his daughter's room and watched her sleep. Eleanor had the same serene face that Mrs. Miller had when she slept. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered in the silence of the night, "for teaching me that loving isn't something you learn once and that's it. It's something you choose and practice every day of your life." Years passed. Edward and Anna had 2 more children, a boy named Gabriel and a girl named Sophia. The house filled with laughter, games, conversations around the dinner table. Edward made sure to be present at all school presentations, all birthdays, all important conversations. When the children asked why he worked less than other fathers, Edward replied, "Because I learned that the time you don't give to those you love, you never get back, and I don't want to regret it again." Eleanor, Gabriel and Sophia grew up knowing the story of the great-grandmother they never saw, but loved as if she had always been present. Edward told them about the courageous woman who worked her whole life to give her son better opportunities. He told them about the love she had for her family. He told them about the day he almost lost her in the pool, and how she taught him to dive into true love. And he always ended the stories by saying, "Great-Grandma Eleanor taught me that the greatest wealth in the world isn't money. It's time, it's attention, it's choosing to be present when the people we love need us. That's what truly makes a family a family." Mrs. Miller's grandchildren grew up with this wisdom in their hearts. They grew up knowing they had a special great-grandmother in heaven who loved them immensely. They grew up understanding that love is an inheritance passed from parent to child, more valuable than any material fortune. And every time one of the grandchildren faced a difficulty, a tough test at school, an argument with friends, a moment of insecurity, Edward remembered the words Mrs. Miller said to him on that terrible and wonderful day by the pool, "Calm down, my love. We still have time." Because the time Mrs. Miller had given Edward didn't end when she died. It continued through every moment of patience he had with Anna during their first years of marriage. It continued through every story he told his children at bedtime. It continued through every hug he gave when they were scared. It continued through every time he chose to leave work early to be present at a school presentation. When Edward turned 60, his children threw a surprise party for him in the house garden. The whole family was gathered: Anna, the 3 children, some distant cousins, close friends. In the middle of the party, Eleanor, who was now 15, gave a speech that moved everyone. "Daddy, we never met Grandma Eleanor in person, but we feel like she lived here with us our whole lives, because you told so many stories about her and taught us so much that she taught you. It's as if she never left." Edward couldn't hold back his tears. "And we wanted to thank you," Eleanor continued, "for learning from the mistakes you made when you were young, for choosing to be a present father, for teaching us that family is the most important thing in life." Gabriel, who was now 12, added, "And we want you to know that when we grow up and have our own children, we'll teach them the same things you taught us, about love, about family, about great-grandma Eleanor, who was the most special person in the world." Sophia, 9 years old, finished the speech with the surprising wisdom of children. "Daddy, we think Grandma Eleanor is here at the party with us. Every time you smile like she smiled, every time you hug us the way she hugged you, she's here." Edward looked around at the wife who loved him, at the children he had raised with presence and affection, at the friends who valued his true friendship, at the house full of beautiful memories, and finally understood what Mrs. Miller had tried to teach him his whole life. Success is not measured by the number of zeros in a bank account. It is measured by the number of people who miss you when you're not around. It is measured by the number of lives you have touched positively. It is measured by the legacy of love you leave for future generations. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Edward and Anna sat on the porch where he used to talk with Mrs. Miller. The aquatic garden glowed under the moonlight, the flowers floating on the surface like fallen stars from the sky. "Do you think she knows?" Anna asked. "Do you think your mum knows what a wonderful man you've become?" Edward smiled, looking at the ceramic urn where he kept his mum's ashes. "I'm sure she knows, and I'm sure she's proud." "How can you be so sure?" "Because every time I choose love instead of pride, every time I choose to be present instead of busy, every time I hug our children the way she hugged me, I feel her here. The love she gave me didn't die with her. It became a part of who I am." Anna rested her head on his shoulder. "She saved you much more than you saved her that day in the pool." "It's true. She taught me that we can drown in many things in life, in work, in money, in pride, in haste. But as long as there is true love nearby, there will always be a way to return to the surface and breathe again." They stayed there late, in silence, listening to the soft sound of the fountain and feeling gratitude for the years they still had ahead to continue building a family based on the values Mrs. Miller had planted in her son's heart. And every morning, for the rest of his life, Edward woke up looking first at the family he had built, then at the aquatic garden that symbolized his transformation, and finally at the urn where he kept his mum's ashes. And he always whispered the same phrase, "Good morning, Mum. Thank you for teaching me to swim in love." If this story touched your heart, like, comment and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.